Hello, everyone. Welcome to Make Believers, a YouTube series from Make Believe Seattle that focuses on genre filmmakers from around the globe, how they work, where they get their inspirations, and much more. Joining us this week is the director of the documentary A Life on the Farm, the best mid-length Juried Award winner at Make Believe Year One, currently available from Drafthouse Films, Oscar Harding.
How's it going, Billy Ray?
Very good, buddy. How are you doing?
Not too shabby, not too shabby.
Now, give us an idea, because people are hearing the accent, but where are you located currently?
Idaho originally. No, I am based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm not from around here, as you may have picked up. I'm from the UK originally, but I've been living in the States for the last 4 years now.
So what made Milwaukee the logical place to call home?
So I was a college student back in the UK doing my undergrad. They offer an exchange year in one of their different sister colleges. So you have a priority list, right? So being 19 and trying to get into movies, obviously the top three were like UCLA. I had a buddy who was a screenwriter who went to Amherst in Massachusetts. That was spot number 4. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to fifth choice. I started looking at what was on their list. I didn't recognize most of the places. The University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, which, spoiler alert, is where I ended up, they were on the top 20 film schools on Hollywood Reporter's list. So I went, screw it, I'm a history major, but I'll see what I can pick up from people there. Didn't think anything of it. A couple of months later, I got this letter saying, congratulations, you're going to Milwaukee. First thing I had to do was go on Google Maps and figure out where the hell it even was. Never heard of the place. And now I live here, so it clearly worked out.
Have you immersed yourself in all of the goodness that Milwaukee has to offer?
Oh, yeah, you betcha. Yeah. No, I genuinely love the Midwest. I'm really glad I ended up here rather than either of the coasts. Spent time in California, New York. I do like them both, but there's just something about the people and the food and the scenery. It would take a lot for me to move out of the Midwest because my wife's from Chicago, so we're back and forth there a lot. I've got friends in the UP, so we go there, and I've got friends in Minneapolis, so.
I mean, let's be honest, it's the cheese curds, right? That's the only
100%.
reason
Oh my God, yes, yeah.
It's just the cheese curds.
I always loved dairy and beer, so it was a home away from home. And you'd
Well,
be surprised, the Midwest nice thing is very close to how passive aggressive the English and the Irish are. So it really does feel like home.
well, let's go back. Let's go back to the sunny fields of home. I use the word sunny loosely.
Yeah.
Give an idea sort of about your cinematic upbringing. Like, were you crazy about films when you were younger? Was it something you grew into? Like, what is it like for a young UK lad?
Yeah, I was one of those annoying kids who had wanted to do it since they were like yay high. I was 4 years old. I went to the Everyman Cinema in Bristol. That's what it's called now. I grew up in
That sounds
Bristol.
like I don't know. That sounds like it might be a queer cinema.
Yeah, it's a queer friendly city, but I mean it was Lady and the Tramp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. But I saw that one, and my mom says I just stood up the entire movie, so I was kind of hooked. And then we had a portable TV stacked on top of a wine crate until I was like 10 or 11 with a built-in VCR, the joys of the 90s. And I would sneak down, I would look at the local TV guide, and I would tape all these horror movies like Pumpkinhead and the Blair Witch Project and Joe Dante's Piranha. And then I would get up early when my parents were still asleep, sneak downstairs so I could watch these horror movies I taped without them knowing. So horror was kind of my way into movies.
and so I mean, you were growing up around the time of the whole video nasties.
I was a little bit shy of that. There was
Okay.
still that moral panic pill clutching Helen Lovejoy kind of thing going on. Because yeah, the video nasties was a huge deal in the UK.
Yeah. I'm curious, were you just as much into documentaries, or was it more just a feature film obsession as a kid?
I mean, it was just films in general. I feel like a lot of people, it's only when they get that little bit older, they get into black and white films and foreign language films and documentaries. So it was mostly just horror and animation for me for the longest time. And then, not that I encourage pirating, although in the age of streaming, it's kind of the only way to preserve media. I went to high school and I had a couple of buddies who would, get a lot of movies that they shouldn't on a hard drive, and I was just like consuming Michael Mann and blaxploitation and Tarsem Singh's movies, and just all these great movies that, you know, you wouldn't have a video store to go to recommend this stuff. And I had this one teacher who would recommend all these great movies to me. He sat me down and made me watch Lawrence of Arabia, and that opened up all kinds of stuff for me. So I had a good movie education from all kinds of different people before I went to college.
I'm wondering, so because I you know, I've been to the UK. I spent a fair amount of time in London, and I love any time that I go over there. But I'm just curious, what is film culture like? What is it like growing up there, and what's that film culture like? And what are maybe the differences between the UK and the US in that regard?
Sure. So part of the problem with the UK, well, there's all kinds of problems, but when it fundamentally comes down to its film culture, I forget who said it, but there's a really good cultural commentator who kind of defined the British film industry as kitsch and sink. So that's either your kind of really miserable, depressing dramas that focus on the working class, but without any kind of joy instilled into it. So a lot of these films about the working class were written by people who went to Eton and Harrow and kind of private schools. So it's just, oh, if you're poor, you must be miserable. So it's either that, or it's Downton Abbey, and it's the costume dramas, and it's this kind of almost pornographic indulgence in what came before, where we don't really want to focus on what's good. And the closest you would get to that, and I have a soft spot for some of them, so I'm not trying to pan them, but it's the Richard Curtis films, which in their own way, the Don John movie describes it really well, the Joseph Gordon-Levitt one. Some of these rom-coms are almost kind of pornographic, so it shows this kind of, you know, picture postcard perfect England, like The Holiday does it really well with Cameron Diaz and Jude Law. So those are the only sides of England that you're really going to see, even if you live in the UK, because Wales doesn't really get a look in, Scotland barely gets a look in, Northern Ireland definitely doesn't, unless it's about the Troubles and the IRA. We're trying to focus on the negative. That's what would really get financed.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons we wanted to make A Life on the Farm is we wanted to show this regional stuff. And Edgar Wright was one of the few people who's really showing the Southwest region with Hot Fuzz. Yeah. So it's kind of Hot Fuzz and Straw Dogs. And now there's this really good indie filmmaker called Mark Jenkin who's doing Bait and Enishmeen in the Cornish language. So that's my region. That's where I'm from. And that was really the only kind of representation I was seeing on screen. Not so much of, you know, people from that place, but just that region.
Yeah.
And the only time you'll see it, it's a grand country estate. And that just doesn't sum up, you know, this kind of rich, complex history. I mean, for example, I come from the city of Bristol, which was one of the main hubs of the transatlantic slave trade. And if there were filmmakers who were trying to show that, they would get browbeaten down. They wouldn't get it financed. They would get overlooked. So you would have to search really, really hard for all this exciting kind of independent British stuff from the regions and outside of London, because I think it's the same here in the US to an extent. If it's not being financed or produced in New York or LA, you're not really seeing it. Or if it's being produced in Atlanta or North Carolina or Texas, you're not seeing those places. You're just seeing Hollywood movies that are shot there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to dive more into that, but first, before we do that, I want to play a trailer for the film. So you and I are just going to hang out for 2 minutes while this puppy plays. So here we go.
Follow me down. I've got something to show you.
I don't know where to even begin with this story. When my grandpa passed away, we went to his house and started clearing out his possessions. And one of my aunts found a videotape.
Have you got your video set up? I'm ready to play you some lovely pictures. Hi there! Charles Carson, 2 Men Farm.
This farmer, Charles Carson, a neighbor of my grandparents, made this feature-length home movie.
Hey, what are you doing there?
It is a truly special work of art.
I know that he did take
sort of quite bizarre photographs of things, like Monty Python, really, when you think about it.
It is a little bit reminiscent of the serial killer Ed Gein.
I can't tell if this guy is a genius or a psychopath.
It's not just exactly how I remember it as a kid, it's even more insane.
Go on, out we come. Here we go. So all I can say is go away to the shops and buy yourself some beef.
He started to show us a lot of very weird, rather macabre, dark pictures.
It looks like a horror movie.
And you have a jolly good look at a placenta.
He'll go down in history.
There's more to it than that. I kept watching. I couldn't believe what I'd seen.
I mean, it is a twist.
Yeah, it totally is. I was not expecting that at all.
Oh, it's marvellous, isn't it?
Well, there we go for the 1000th time, I'm sure, for you watching that trailer. So take me back to the day when you were aware that this VHS tape had been sort of rediscovered. Take us back to the day, and when was the moment when it popped in your head? Oh, I've got to do something with this shit.
So it's a funny story. It came about because of my producer and the film's assistant director, Don Platt, one of my two producing partners. So he's German. And he and I was just chatting one weekend, and he said that he and his partner and her parents had gone down to the West Country, which, just to give a bit of context, the West Country is what we refer to as Bristol and the counties of Somerset, Devon, and Cornwall, very roughly. It's kind of like what do you call that part of the shoe, the main bit?
Oh, you mean Florida? No, the tip.
Yeah, exactly right. So that part of the UK, so it's just south of Wales, to give people a little bit of context. Yeah. Other side of the country from London.
You said the boot, so I automatically thought Florida.
Oh, I thought Italy. Sorry.
Yes. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Anyway, so he had been there, and I said, "Well, how did it go?" He said, "Oh my God, we went to this hotel, and I thought we weren't going to make it out alive. It was like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was this creepy old dude. I didn't understand his accent. We got there in the middle of the night, and it was really uncomfortable, and we just tried to rush out the next morning." And he said that, and I went, "Have I ever told you about this videotape that was circulating in my family?" And then we started talking, and I hadn't thought about it in a long, long, long time. I'd only seen about half of it when I was a kid. And then my dad switched it off, which, if you've seen the film, for obvious reasons, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Yeah. So it just came back into my mind, and I saw my aunt a couple of weeks later, and I brought it up. I thought we had lost the tape when we'd moved house. And she said, "You should have brought this up years ago. I've always had a copy." So one, idiot. But then two, I was like, "Please, can I have it?" So I very vividly remember going home, and it was just me, lights were off, put the DVD in the TV, and just, when you're a kid and you see something, you kind of imagine it to be more kind of amazing and over the top than it actually is. And you watch it as an adult, and you think, I was kind of adding a bit more color to it than needs to be there. This thing was even more extraordinary than I remembered it being as a kid. And you just see this, and it's like, even if nothing comes of this, I have to try and do something with it. Like, I have to know who the hell this guy is, what his story is, because with no context, it's just the most insane video you'll ever watch.
Well, it's funny because they mention in the trailer, this one mentions that it's very Ed Gein-like. And she's not wrong. It very much is. And it's so funny. I just saw, I can't believe I'm comparing, I'm having a comparison here to your film in Fast X, but I saw the new Fast and Furious film, and there's a moment in that film, and I don't want to spoil it, but there's a moment that comes out of nowhere, and it feels like you're plucked straight into an Ed Gein nightmare. But the first thing I thought about when I saw it was like, this feels like Life on the Farm. It's a very heightened version of Life on the Farm. It's very, but in reality, it's probably more akin to Ed Gein than it is your film.
We've been in talks with Vin Diesel and the team to get Charles's little custom tractor cart thing in there in the final movie. That's the plan.
I'm curious because, this is the definition of a relic, right? It's something left over from a bygone era. And how difficult was it for you to sort of do the kind of thorough investigation on this person who isn't a public figure? This isn't someone who's out there. Like, what was that investigation process like?
Really bloody hard. So I'm fortunate in that my background's in research. I used to be a researcher on documentaries and historical period dramas. So I was coming at it with a little bit of experience to be a bit of a detective. But we had a couple of problems. So one was most of the people who could have told us something about his life were dead at that point. Like, more than once, I would call someone up and their partner or their widow would answer the phone to say, "I'm sorry, but this person died 5 years ago."
Yeah.
But then the other problem was we would speak to a lot of people who knew one aspect of Charles's life. And then we would tell them stuff we'd found out from the period before or after that chapter, and they had no idea about it. So it was a nightmare trying to piece together this jigsaw of this guy's life. That was the most stressful thing. And then we started shooting this as a short. And this was before Nick and Joe from the Found Footage Festival came along, and it's before we found additional footage. And we realized there was kind of too much story to make this a short, and it had to be a feature, which is not an easy decision to come to. But just more and more of his story was unfolding. And then by the time this was about to become a feature, COVID happened. And I have a production team in England while I'm here in the US who are trying to film this safely. We had about 3 or 4 lockdowns in the UK. And on top of that, most of our interviewees are elderly and vulnerable. So we're trying to film safely. We're trying to go to the middle of nowhere. And on top of that, they are trying to make this film without the director there. And on the same kind of flip side of it, I'm over here without my cinematographer and one of my key producers trying to shoot in various states in the US. And obviously we didn't have lockdowns in the same way, but you want to be considerate or you want to be safe. Every different state has different rules about COVID restrictions. And while you're doing that, it's like trying to build the train track while the train's arriving into the station. We're trying to find out about his life and we're trying to verify things.
Yeah.
So because this is in rural communities, it was just, I've never faced a challenge like on any other documentary I've worked on about obscure figures. I mean, this guy was a mystery. And I really think we've got the most comprehensive story one can get about Charles's life, but we're probably still missing key parts.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of part of the enigma of the film to me. Hold on. I'm detecting some sort of weird echo on my recording. I'm going to make a note of that so I can edit that out.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything on my end.
No, well, I mean, like they've decided that today is going to be like, it sounds like I'm living on a farm right now. So I'm going to just make a note of that and then we'll just dive right back in. Before I keep going, apologies to anyone wondering what the racket is in the background. If you can hear that, they have evidently decided that today is the day that they're going to upend all of the land on every side of me for some reason. So apologies for that background noise if it is there. But so talking about the difficulty of kind of sort of researching this person, you know, watching the film, you are left with a fair amount of, you know, I guess for lack of a better word, plot holes. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like, I think the mystery of him, not as a person, but as a person and a character, I think it adds to the entertainment of the film. Like this idea that you're never going to fully know who this person was. That's just not in the cards. But like, you're getting this weird pieced together version of the person that almost fits in some weird way with like the video that he made. Like it's very disparate and weird.
And it's a miracle that we even got it to that point. I mean, I all credit to my editor, Hannah Christensen. She's the secret weapon of this film. It's the only reason it all kind of holds together, honestly. I'm shocked we managed to get as comprehensive a picture of the guy as we did. But the devastating thing is, and I tell this at every Q&A and I always get the same reaction. We went to interview Charles's cousin, Charlie Norman, who's in the film quite a bit. He's the one who got Charles into filmmaking. And as we were packing up to leave, he told the producers, "Oh, it's a shame you didn't come here about 5 years earlier." So they said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said that they had moved house a few years ago, and up in his attic, they had over 200 tapes of Charles's stuff. And he thought no one would want it, and he threw it all away. So there is a very good chance that what you see in the film, and we left very little of the 2 hours of footage we had on the cutting room floor. This is all that exists of what this man did. And he was making films for over a decade. And I'm just praying that when we release in the UK this fall, somebody sees it and they happen to have more of his work, because it's going to be a crying shame if this documentary is all that exists of his work.
Wow. So 5 years removed, and you could have had the mother load.
Oh,
and
yes.
who knows what would have been in that?
Well, it would have been a very, very different film. Maybe it could be a stronger film. I don't know. But I'm just devastated as a genuine fan of his work that that's all gone now.
Yeah, I mean, there's something. I mean, look, I think we inherently as audiences kind of identify with weirdos, like the weirdos, and so and I think Charles Carson definitely qualifies as that, and I mean that in the best ways possible.
I would really like to think he's up in the canon of Tommy Wiseau and Jack Winnebago Man Rebney and Mark Borchardt. I really hope that he becomes kind of a cult figure among cinephiles. I really do.
Well, because he's just being real. Like, he's being real. Yes, he's like, there are costumes and weird props and like all sorts of shit, but like, dude's just going around the farm being himself and having fun and like occupying his time. And, you know, it was fascinating to me, like hearing about his, you know, his younger days, like hearing about him. Was he a teacher? Was that what it was?
Yeah, he was. Well, he was a lecturer. So
a lecturer. That was
they
it.
bring him in to advise on certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, and just like learning about his past and like, and also like all the tragedy that he overcame, and like you're when you get that full picture, you're surprised that his stuff isn't more macabre than it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what struck us is when you first watch this, you are going to laugh at it. We certainly did. I don't blame an audience for doing that at the very start, because you have no context. And if you don't come from that kind of life, if you're not a farmer, you're not going to get it. Like, we've had farmers who watch this and they say, I don't get why you're all thinking this is amazing. This is just farming life. But most of us aren't. But once you get past that, and we've watched his stuff so many times to edit the film, it's genuinely funny. Like, we worked hard to make this a good-looking film and a film that sounded good. But this film is only as good as its subject and the subject's work. And he's genuinely funny. Like, after a while, you do stop laughing at him and you are laughing with him, because he's constructing jokes and he's editing. Like, if he wasn't like a good filmmaker, I don't think his work would land quite the same way.
I agree. He actually is a good filmmaker, which is what makes those 200 missing videos literally, like you said, devastating. Who knows? There could have been his magnum opus tucked away in that.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. I bet this isn't the best stuff he ever made.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm like you. I hope some people out there have copies or something and can come forward and be like, oh, by the way, we have this treasure trove of Charles's stuff. So talk a little bit about, you know, the film is out now, right? So it's available from Drafthouse Films, which is awesome. I had lost track of the fact that they even released films anymore.
They got bought out by Giant Pictures a couple years ago, because I think Tim League moved on to Neon, which is obviously works out quite well for him. No, they're back in full force. What's lovely is they've got a full slate of docs this year. They've picked up the Wakaliwood documentary. They picked up Mr. Organ, David Farrell's latest, which played Make Believe.
We also screened, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really happy. That's my favorite.
And Chop and Steal. They did Chop and Steal, right?
Yeah, which is amazing. I'd recommend everyone watch it. But they've been a very good partner. We are out in the US and Canada now. We'll be out in Australia and New Zealand with them pretty soon. We're playing the UK and Ireland in the fall with Bulldog Film Distribution, who are a good partner. I'm just really happy it's finally out there. And we're doing the festival run until October, November time in multiple different continents. So it's going to be nice when this is over, honestly. I'm very proud of it. But, like, you know, you're a filmmaker, you know what it's like. It's exhausting. And you kind of just want it to be done and you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, they always tell you, like, always have the next project ready to go. And I'm like, I understand that. That's easier said than done when you're putting every waking minute into like promoting something and Q&As and interviews and like this one.
And unless there's someone with a big bag of cash ready to make your next project. Again, yeah, it's nice when people say that, but
I'm curious. I this is just something as someone who runs more Q&As than I can even fathom, and someone who really gets pissed at people who run bad Q&As. What is the worst question you have received in a Q&A for this film so far?
Boy.
The one that just made you either furious or made you just befuddled or like made you combative. Like,
yeah. Okay, so it's a bit of a cop-out, but it wasn't me, but Dom, one of the producers on this. He lives in Australia, and he was going to a festival there. And he had the most frustrating Q&A where a guy asked a question. I think it was about Charles's dad, I think. And he answered it. But then the guy kept trying to find out more and prize more, and Dom kept having to answer it in the same way, to the point where it went on for 20 minutes.
oh.
The moderator wasn't able to shut this guy up, and no one else got to ask a question. And it's just like, he gave a satisfying answer, and it wasn't good enough for this guy. The problem with the Q&A, I don't even think it's the questions being asked. It's the people who assume their question is more important than anyone else's. That's the worst one. Actually, but no, for me, the worst is when you hear, are you going to make a sequel? Because I don't want to be rude, but like, what the hell are you meant to say? It's very clearly not going to set up a sequel.
Yeah, that's a dumb question. That has nothing to do with even frustrating. That's just a dumb question. It boggles my mind that you have folks who like are so eager to ask a question. They build up and they figure it out. They this is what you got. This is the question that you've got after all of, oh God, it just drives me crazy.
I went to a Q&A of Black Klansman, and they were live streaming the Q&A with Spike Lee, and this one woman in the audience, keep in mind this is being broadcast to like multiple theaters in the UK. She dominated 20 minutes of the Q&A. So everyone across the country is sat there watching this woman take this time up when we want to listen to Spike Lee. It was, it's so annoying.
Yeah, I just recently attended a Q&A for Beau is Afraid in Los Angeles, and it was Ari Aster, Joaquin Phoenix did a quick little intro, and then Rachel Sennett, the actress from like Shiva Baby, conducted the Q&A. And let me just preface by saying this is no offense to Rachel Sennett as an actress, and no offense to Ari Aster as a filmmaker, but it was the most insufferable, horrible Q&A I've ever attended in my life. Like, she did not know how to run a Q&A. He did not seem like he wanted to be there and could not answer even the most basic question. I also think the previous night they had posted that they had all done acid. So I'm wondering if they were all just coming down off of that. And so, because it was just a train wreck, and I'm sitting there the whole time like I could have.
Why did you even bother? I could have seen the film get home by now.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, and Joaquin Phoenix introduces the film in like total darkness without a microphone, just kind of ambles out in his like weird way and just starts talking and introducing the film.
It's so tricky. I think that people just assume that the artist is going to be a good showman and promoter,
and it's not the case.
I get why theaters do it. It is so hard for a theater to make money now. They have to have that added value.
Yeah.
But then the people they need for that added value may not be the best people to do it.
Yeah, and I was just like, I would rather hear like the Key Grip talking about his experience on the film than Ari Aster, because I feel like he would have had more insight into Ari Aster's process than Ari Aster had.
I've been to Q&As where the cinematographer or the editor or the composer have been there, and they've been better than when the actual director showed up. No shade to whoever that director is.
No, look,
they make a great film. They may not be, they might be painfully shy.
It's a different skill set. It's a totally different skill set. People just assume that, you make a movie, you must be really an extrovert and you must love all these things. No, like most filmmakers are not extroverts. They are introverts, and they want to do what they do with the people they want to do it with. And then it's like pulling teeth to like get anything out close to the marketing side of it. But I'm always fascinated by bad Q&A questions. Can't help it. So talking about, you grew up on narrative features more so than documentaries. You kind of grew into that. What are some of your inspirations in sort of the documentary world when you're thinking about this film particularly, or just in general? And do you even want to be a documentary filmmaker, or are you just wanting to be a filmmaker and this just happened to be my first feature?
Yeah, it's very much the latter. I mean, look, since I started to, develop my taste more as I got older, I love documentaries. I really, really do. I would argue that because we're in the golden age of documentaries, a lot of the time I'm anticipating docs more than I am narratives. Like they're the ones I get more excited about, because they're just getting so much better, while narrative is sort of, I don't want to be one of these people saying they get worse because that's bullshit. But like, it's harder to get a narrative made now. I think.
Yeah,
I think that's what the problem is.
It's harder to get it made and harder to get people to watch it.
Yeah, that in the age of streaming is not easy. But I love docs, but I didn't think I had the skill set for it because I think you see narrative filmmakers hopping over to docs, and sometimes you get a Scorsese who knows exactly what they're doing because it's Scorsese and they do a great doc. Then you get some other people, and they are too arrogant to realize you need a different skill set when you're telling somebody else's story.
Yeah.
So, you know, myself and my partners, we planned to get into narrative. That was our first love. That's where we'd all kind of, you know, got our experience in. And this fell into our laps, and like, come on, you'd be mad not to try and do something with this. So we all looked at each other and went, I guess we're making a doc now. And then we're currently shooting another doc, funnily enough, here in Milwaukee. That is definitely the last one. Again, this one fell into my lap, and the subject's fascinating. But it's going to be a short because there's less story to it. And I don't want to take it 5 years of my life, which would be nice. But I'm hoping that the next one after that is a narrative, whatever it may be. But in terms of docs that I love, Dear Zachary is one of the most devastating things I've ever seen.
One of my favorite film festival experiences, and this is when I worked at Sidewalk in Birmingham, and we screened we screened Dear Zachary, and watching it like for the first time with like 200 people who had no idea what they were in for. I've never heard so many gasps and like wails and just like fury erupting in an audience in real time. I still think it's one of the most effective docs ever made.
Oh, I'd argue it's one of the most effective films ever made.
Oh.
I mean, it's phenomenal.
Yeah,
it really is. Before I moved to Milwaukee, I fell in love with the Doc American movie, which is just an all-timer.
Yep.
It's funny, just by accident, when you live in this city, you run into Mark Borchardt all the time. All the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like they're the main two that spring to mind that, you know, they were kind of two of the big driving points when the editor and I were talking about how we wanted to make this film.
Yeah.
Just because obviously we're not on the level of Dear Zachary. But there's that little personal element like there was with Kurt Cohen, the director of that doc. And then we just loved American movies so much, the two of us, that we just kind of wanted to emanate a little bit of that. Actually, a great doc, maybe it played Sidewalk, is Finders Keepers. That was another big one.
Yeah. Love Finders
Great
Keepers.
Doc. Great
Love that one. And I'm sure, I mean, I can't imagine that wouldn't have played Sidewalk. I remember seeing that film at the Indie Grits Film Festival in Columbia, South Carolina, which is no longer operating. But
Shirkers was another one. Have you seen Shirkers?
I have.
I have one. But actually, one of the biggest inspirations that Hannah and I didn't realize, because we did a Q&A for the DVD, and we were asking each other what were the inspirations for this, and I brought up Sarah Polley's Stories We Tell, which is phenomenal.
You're just naming all the best docs of the last like 25 years right now.
I have very good taste. No, but then Hannah just brought up that was a huge inspiration for me too. So we were both working with the same kind of guidelines without even realizing it. But I remember when we first decided to make this film, Stories We Tell was immediately, I went, that's the kind of film I want to make.
Yeah.
I mean, she's phenomenal. I haven't seen Women Talking yet. I'm really excited to, but just how to make a personal doc feel universal. Yeah. I mean, she's an absolute master of the craft.
And best example of that, my favorite doc of all time is Tarnation.
I still need to see that. That's been on my watch list for a while.
And like talk about like taking something so like gut-wrenchingly personal and like presenting it in this like such a unique way. At the time was such a unique way. Now you see a lot of people sort of aping what Jonathan did, but man, just a powerhouse documentary. Like
I'm really excited to see Tarnation.
It's so, and the sequel too. It's got a sequel called Wake Up Renee. Talk about your sequels to docs. Like I'm sure Jonathan got that question occasionally and was like, "No, I'm not going to make a sequel." Then he made a sequel.
Actually, one doc that, while we're just on the recommendation kind of treadmill, one that never ever gets talked about that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite docs of the last 10 years. It's called Ramblin' Freak.
Oh, I don't know that one at all.
Okay, I think it only played South by Southwest because Parker Smith, who made it, is from Austin. And it's a crying shame no one ever talks about this doc. It's brilliant. I think it's on Prime, I think. So he shot the whole thing on this VCR camcorder that he had just got off of eBay or Craigslist. I think it was eBay. But there was a tape inside it, and there was this legendary bodybuilder who's referred to as the man whose arms exploded. He was doing all these steroids, and literally, I think he just completely destroyed his arm muscles. So he goes from Austin to New Jersey with his cat, and he just goes on this lonely road trip, recording the whole thing on a real VCR camcorder to get to New Jersey just to meet this guy, because I don't want to give anything away, but he has a family tragedy. And he's just completely lost and aimless, and that's why he goes on this trip to find purpose. And it is funny, it's beautiful, it's mysterious, a rambling freak. It's so good. I
that sounds
recommend
awesome.
it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Because it's kind of similar to when we started making this. I wanted to look at movies that were kind of set in remote areas, and there's a really good Spanish/Dutch doc called Santoalla, Santoalla. And it's about this Dutch couple who moved to this abandoned Spanish village. Well, there's just two other people, one other couple who were the remote inhabitants of this little village in the middle of rural Spain. And things get very, very dark and weird from there. I don't want to say anything more, but
I love that we've just gone on a doc recommendation. I love that. So I want to close with kind of a question. This is more of a hopeful question in terms of, we know that you're a horror fan. You're offered the opportunity to tackle any horror film that's ever been released. You can take it, put your own unique spin on it. Which film is like, oh, hell yes, this one in a heartbeat?
Are we talking about remaking a film or tackling a franchise?
Let's say either or. I'm a both and person.
All right. Well, we're going to go with Hellraiser. Just
Hellraiser.
I've loved that franchise. I love that film. Big fan of the reboot David Bruckner did last year. Just there's something about Clive Barker's world that I just find fascinating. You can get into sexual politics. There's a Lovecraftian element to it. There's this vast kind of lore and mythology. There's the visual opportunities. I went and binged the entire franchise earlier this year, just because I think it all hit HBO Max. And like most of them are awful, but there's one or two where there's some really interesting ideas in there. The first two are classics. The third one is not great, but I absolutely love it. Like that nightclub massacre scene is an all-timer. Yeah. The fourth one, it's not great, but there's some fun ideas in there. And then there's kind of peaks and troughs, but it is all kind of bargain bin trash until David Bruckner's reboot. But what a fascinating universe. And I was watching Tarsem Singh's The Cell over the weekend. And I just watched that, and that's the best Hellraiser movie ever made that wasn't a Hellraiser movie. And I saw Annihilation, and I thought, I want Alex Garland to make a Hellraiser movie. Because there's just something about cosmic horror in this really interesting kind of like, they're taking something like sex, but they're doing it in this very cold, clinical way. Yeah. And I just think, I know it's the discourse of, there's never sex scenes in movies now, and, how do we kind of go back from that? But do we do it in a sex positive and mature and progressive and interesting way? And I've always loved horror, primarily because, and genre, I guess, when you throw in sci-fi and action. That's where I think some of the most profound commentary is made on identity and gender and sex and politics and race. But because it's wrapped up in this thing of it's a monster movie or it's an alien invasion movie, you can kind of slip more interesting stuff in there than if you just did a straight up movie about, say, apartheid as opposed to District 9, or about race as opposed to Get Out or Us or Nope.
Wow. You would have, so like a few years ago, my very first year at Fantastic Fest. So this would have been probably 2015, maybe 2016, but I think it was 2015. And I just remember we were at this party at Tim League's house. He does this party at his place every year. And there was this guy at the time from Dimension Films who was an executive at Dimension Films who was walking around with a business card who was saying, if you have an idea or a pitch for a new Hellraiser movie, email me. Literally, that's what he was doing. And it was just so bizarre. He was hitting everybody too. Got a new Hellraiser pitch? Email me. Got a new one? Email me.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, trying to desperately keep the rights up until the last minute.
Yeah.
But I think it's reverted back to Clive Barker now, which is great.
Yeah.
There'll be some more interesting stuff.
I mean, the reason we've got most of the bad Hellraisers we do is because they were just making them to keep the rights. So
I've got a soft spot for one or two of them in spite of all that, though.
Oh, gosh, you and Graham Skipper. I don't know if you know Graham, but Graham is a big Hellraiser stan. So
I hope to meet Graham. I really do. I just love those movies, the books, all of it, the whole universe.
Well, Oscar, thank you so much for chatting with us.
It's been fun. It's been nice to see you again. It's been a while since Seattle.
It has indeed. And next week, we will be back with another episode. We're going to be talking with the team behind the Third Saturday in October films, which are also currently available on VOD. And they're both a lot of fun. I don't know that you got to see those.
I was at Sidewalk and I caught part 5. But
okay.
I didn't get to see part 1. So that's next on my watch list.
Well, I'm sure they'll be delighted. That team will be delighted to know that they are on your watch list. Thank you so much, Oscar. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week. And until then, stay safe, wash your ears, and if you have a pitch for a new Hellraiser movie, email that guy at Dimension. Peace out.